everybody, and welcome to the Barcoding Huddle. I'm your host, Jody Costa, the Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Partnerships for Barcoding Incorporated. Barcoding is a supply chain automation innovation company dedicated to helping organizations be more efficient, accurate, and connected. And today, I'm very excited to be talking to one of our strategic partners, SOTI, and we're going to talk about taking control of your supply chain operations with their platform, SOTI One, which is also connected to our platform, IntelliTrack. SOTI is a proven leader at creating innovative solutions that reduce the cost and complexity of business-critical mobility and IoT. Thousands of companies around the world depend on them to secure, manage, and support mobile operations. Barcoding has been supported by SOTI for at least a decade or more, and I've had the great fortune of working with them for close to 13 years now. So I'm really excited about today's conversation, and I'm really ready to huddle it up with my new friend. So Mikhail, will you please join me on camera?
Hey, Jody, thank you very much. Pleasure to be on today.
Welcome to the huddle.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, we get a very special huddle because it's just you and me today, but that means we get to go and just really dig into some very exciting topics. And based on some of our pre-huddle conversations, I think it's going to be a good one today.
I'm excited for it. Lots to talk about when it comes to supply chain.
Oh yeah, always. So thank you again to SOTI for bringing us this huddle today, and we're really excited to dive into it with you. And like I said, you guys are just a core partner for us. Our customers rely on our partnership, and I'm just happy to be able to be part of this today. So, first things first, I kind of said I've been at Barcoding a little over 13 years. That feels old to me, but I know that my career in Barcoding is a little bit probably shy of yours. So why don't you give us your quick introduction and who you are and how you got here?
Yeah, no, really appreciate it. I actually been at SOTI for almost 11 years now, going to be 11 years in March. So over that decade mark, right? Like I like to say, we love where we work. So,
right.
It's been a really interesting journey for myself. Today, I'm the Senior Director of Product Strategy and Sales Enablement at SOTI. But over my 11 years, I've really held a lot of different roles within the organization. When I first started at SOTI, I started right in the support channel. For me, it was in the ground, working with customers, working with partners like yourselves to really help them solve the challenges and work on implementing our product. And from that point, believe it or not, when I first joined SOTI, we were, Android was just coming out. It was Android 2.1, iOS 5. We were introducing the first ever version of our web console before it was all the desktop manager. So not to date myself, but it's definitely been an interesting journey from there, right? Like starting from those humble beginnings. And then really, over the next 5 years, we developed our sales engineering team, and myself and one of my other colleagues were at the forefront of that. And it really allowed us to work so much closer with our sales organizations and really understand how our products are being implemented, what challenges are we solving, in that date and time. And, now we're looking at a completely different set of challenges, over the last couple of years. And it's been really interesting to really evolve from that role through sales engineering. I took on a couple of other different roles working with product management at that time, still under the sales engineering umbrella. I know we grew the team from 4 sales engineers to over 65 globally at the end of last year. And then just recently, I moved to the role that I'm in today, which is the Senior Director of Product Strategy and Sales Enablement, which now allows me to really bring it all together, empower our sales teams with understanding what challenges are we solving, whether it be across the supply chain for retailers, for healthcare, something that's been very interesting to see to come to fruition. So it's amazing to see the organization grow around me as well, right? So it's been quite a journey.
Congratulations. And
Thank you.
I think I learned employee 151.
Yeah, I was 151 when I joined. We're over 1,800 people strong, I believe, was the last number I got from the marketing team. And it was, it's just amazing to see that, right? And the technology's grown right alongside it. And I know our partnership has continued to grow as well with all the challenges we're able to solve and all the value we're able to provide.
Oh yeah, and that's something that I've noticed over my tenure here too. It's just been great to see. Well, I hope that all of our viewers are like, yes, like we got the guy. So we're gonna just dive right in. I mean, I think you kind of nailed it, right? There's always been complexity in IT, and I think it's very easy to date yourself when you're in our line of work, right? I mean, 11 years wasn't that long ago, but
No.
it was that long ago. So I think in our world that it's very easy to kind of be outdated, and the complexity has, to me, I know things were complex back then, but I feel like the sheer scale and speed of today's supply chains is something that hasn't been seen before. And the complexity of the mobile operations behind that, right, and infrastructure components is more complex than ever, right? Different types of devices, all with their own different needs and their different applications and their different OSs, their different versioning, and it just, I mean, it hurts my brain to think about. So I think I'd love to just start there and get your perspective on what you're seeing in today's environment and what, maybe VPs and CIOs are dealing with.
Yeah. And I mean, I'll start off with a bit of a story about a customer journey that I always like to position to, you talked about the sheer scale of growth within mobility. We were working with one of our customers, actually Delivery Hero at the time, back in 2017. They started their fleet off, I believe at that time, they were managing about 50,000 devices, right? So not a small fleet by any means necessary, but we actually circled back with them last year and we looked at their fleet and they've grown to over 1 million devices, right? You look at a journey of going from 50,000 devices, managing over 1 million devices under a single platform, and some of the challenges that have come with that, right? You talk about the life cycle management of the devices from the time they unbox it to the time they retire or update those devices. And working with a customer like that and really understanding what were their challenges, and provisioning was a big part of that. They talked about going from 4 minutes of staging per device down to 7 seconds. And at one point they were doing 3,000 devices a day, right? So when you talk about that speed of efficiency and being able to get those devices out in the field and not just powering them on and getting them ready, but getting them enterprise ready, making sure they have the right apps, making sure they have the right content on them, and really get into the hands of the restaurants that they're supporting. And I like to position that story because it just shows how an organization over 5 years has massively adopted mobility and has continued to grow through acquisitions, through natural growth. And they need a solution like the One platform to be able to manage all of those devices and be able to cohesively drive efficiency through their operations, right? And, it's very interesting to see their journey as well, because they also face challenges from what type of technology do I use? How do I even source that many devices from a single vendor? I think we've all been, talking about supply. I know Nadeem was on a couple of podcasts ago and he talked about supply chain challenges, right? How do you order 50, 60,000 devices and make sure they're there to even start provisioning? So it was so interesting to work with them and work through the OEM relationships to make sure we're kind of supporting them through that journey as a whole. And that's just a small part of it, right? There's the whole ongoing maintenance part of it. Just really every part of the device lifecycle we were able to really make an impact on for them.
Yeah. And so just to back up, I think that's a great story. And I think a lot of companies out there can appreciate the fact that mobility is more important to their operations than ever before, right? Certainly as consumers, we are all used to our smartphones by now. It's kind of table stakes. But I think in the supply chain and the ops side of the world, I still hear people say the words RF gun, right? So I think there's still a little bit of this balancing act of the technology has gotten more complex and more, it offers more to run your business, right? And taking advantage of mobility is an advantageous thing. But yet, these are sophisticated computers that need sophisticated management. So talk to me. I think that's probably what you're also seeing on the SOTI side is mobile device management. I don't know if that's really where it ends today, right? I mean, it's just the beginning.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Like I said, when I first started off, everything was about the Windows mobile space. Everything was the handheld guns, right? It was just, we were collecting purchase orders at that point. Everyone needed to scan
good times.
Yeah, good times, great times. And but that was the MDM space. And when you look at MDM, it's really mobile device management. And that was what was at the heart of it. It's focusing on the device. It didn't really take into account content. It didn't take into account a lot of different use cases that mobility has evolved into. And when we really look at the natural evolution, I would say, of where MDM went to the EMM space, the enterprise mobility management space, you started having many different form factors of devices. It wasn't your standard scan gun. You started getting Android devices that might be headless to show you inventory counts. It might be devices in various different form factors that are replacing the Windows mobile devices that are on there, right? It might be, even Windows devices that are coming into play. And I think one of the biggest things, it was BYOD, right? Like,
oh yeah,
people started bringing in, and, it was this whole craze at one point. No, everyone's going to bring their own devices. We're going to manage it. And that was a big part of the EMM journey for myself, because when you talk about enterprise mobility management, it really is about content, devices, and processes, and being able to give people that email, contacts, everything on their device, which wasn't really a big use case when I first started at SOTI, but it evolved massively over the next few years. And organizations needed to manage everything from, the guns running in the warehouse to the devices that our employees are bringing in to digital screens. And that's really been a big shift towards the EMM space. And I know recently we're now moving into UEM, Unified Endpoint Management, right? It's almost like IoT. What are we doing with all those endpoints?
We love the acronyms. We love it.
That's what I mean. Tech. It's all about acronyms. I always say when people join on, we got to give you the acronym background. But when we look at UEM now, it really could be anything, right? Like you've talked about the RF scan guns. Well, now we're managing headless Android devices. We're managing RF readers in the ceiling. We're managing baggage handlers. We're managing BYOD devices. We're really managing any single platform that runs an operating system under the sun. And these organizations are adapting to needing to drive a mobile first strategy. So whatever they were doing from a manual perspective, if it can be digitized or it can be automated, mobility will always play a massive part into that, because they have to drive operational efficiency, right? As I always say, there's only 8 hours in a day. I'm sure for most of us, it's more than that. And a lot of the supply chain operations run 24 hours a day, but people can't work 24 hours a day, right? And when you look to drive efficiency, the option's not always to hire somebody else because it's going to hit your bottom line. It's to better adopt technology to help you do more with less. And I think that just plays into that whole journey. When you look at MDM was the device, EMM, you look at content and people, and now UEM, you look at the whole connected enterprise.
That's awesome. And I know for some viewers, we hear these acronyms tossed around, and barcoding, we certainly speak this language, but sometimes I think we think that everyone else speaks the same language as us. So thank you for going through that with us. I think thinking about all these macro trends that have really forced the adoption of digitalization and, as you said, the mobility first strategy, I think some of that's also an outcropping of the growth in Android and the flexibility that's been able to come with that. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you've seen there and kind of what you think the future looks like there?
Yeah, I mean, the Android journey's been probably the most interesting one that I've personally had a chance to work with. When we first started out with the Android management, like I talked about managing Android 2.1, like the first Android phones when they came to the market, it was really about the relationship that we had with the particular OEMs, right? You look at Samsung, an absolute leader in the space. But then you look at so many other OEMs that have come to market, Zebra, Honeywell, obviously going through that transition of Windows Mobile to Android adoption, specifically within the supply chain and warehousing retail. I mean, global leaders. And then you go down the route of really seeing how were those devices managed at that time. And the technology that we brought forth was working specifically with the OEMs to have a specific functionality to manage these devices, to be able to configure settings that otherwise were not standardized at that time, right? There was no management framework from Google per se, right? And you look at that, and there was a lot of overhead to be able to work with every vendor to make sure those devices are supported as needed. And that was, all the way from then until about Android 6, there was no standardized framework, as I mentioned. And when you look at Android 6, and I'm going to say probably more Android 7, just for generalization, but then Google brought in this whole concept of Android Enterprise, Android, Google Android for the enterprise, and how these organizations are going to be using that. And that revolutionized the way we look at management, because it gave you a level, I don't want to say a level playing field, but it gave you a playing field that everybody can play on, essentially, that you have a standardized set of management that you go and pick different vendor devices for your organization, you're going to get this at a minimum. There's still a massive amount of work that needed to be done in regards to specific functionalities for some of the OEM specific functions and settings and features. But it really helped organizations standardize, right? Because, you know, I remember seeing a graph a couple of years ago, and it showed Android fragmentation. And it just showed how many different devices are running on different operating systems compared to potentially Apple, where everyone tries to upgrade to the latest and greatest. And that's a challenge for organizations to manage at that point, right? But once you had that start of standardization, it was a journey. And at that point, where we are today, you know, with the latest versions of Android, that framework has really grown. And when you look at other things like application config, app config, the community, OEM config, which is, you know, more prevalent to the rugged device manufacturers like Zebra, Honeywell, Data Logic, they've absorbed that into the Android enterprise framework. And now we're able to really bring standardized management to a lot of these organizations that might be multi-vendor, right? And it just really helped that journey, and specifically the adoption of those mobile devices. And yeah. I know we're going to talk a little bit about the Android migration journey, but I think to wrap this part up, it was really a collaboration of what we were doing in our space, how we were working with the OEM vendors, and how we were working with the likes of Google to really have a cohesive and streamlined approach to Android management, which allows organizations to adopt mobility at a much quicker pace and obviously manage it in a multi-vendor network.
Yeah, I mean, the maturation of the space, right? I mean, SOTI has been a leader, and barcoding is proud to be kind of alongside of you in that leadership. But I think this is still going on today, right? I mean, the work's not done.
No.
Yeah, the work's never done. We've got to continue to evolve, be able to provide better management. And I want to circle back to this concept of managing that total device lifecycle. I think this is important. So we've set the stage, like we don't know where we're going if we don't know where we've been. So we've gone through some of that journey, but talk to me now about like what are those expectations around mobility management that customer that you're seeing out there in the space today?
Yeah, I mean, when you really look at the device lifecycle, right, from the time you unbox that device, it really starts its life cycle, right? You need to make sure that you can get it up and running as quickly as possible. Like you talk about making sure the right applications are on the device. You're talking about continuously updating settings on the device. You're talking about maintenance of those devices, security and regulations, data privacy. I mean, you look at where data privacy alone has won in the last 5 years. You look at GDPR settings in Europe as an example, and I believe for them, it's 20 million euros or 2% of your annual revenue, whichever one is greater. And you look at fines like that a lot of these regulatory bodies have really put forth on these devices. So it just shows you how important it is to make sure that throughout that device's life cycle that you're really able to manage security, you're able to keep track of those devices. And, you know, when we really look at the value that organizations get from it, it is about provisioning. How quickly can you get that device up and running? How quickly can you make sure that that device is reconfigured for a different role? When we talk about shared devices, which is a trend that I've seen being picked up, you know, sometimes we think of a streamlined approach. We get a device, it's for this role, and that person's going to use it to do that. But a lot of organizations, to drive efficiency and to control costs, are saying because there's different shifts and different workers, based on who logs into the device, you might have to have a whole other persona. So when you think about that, that's almost like reprovisioning the device from beginning, right? And, you know, you might not even have a different policy you have to configure. It just has to be done automatically on the fly. And using the SOTI One platform, you know, organizations are able to do that. They're able to meter that, and they're able to really bring the right settings at the right time to any different job role within their organizations. And then, you know, when you really look at the key area where customers are seeing the value, and I know you hear about this every single day, it's, you know, when we surveyed our pool of enterprise customers, they said, well, what are the key things that you worry about or that impedes employee productivity and operational efficiency? The top response that came back is Wi-Fi or connectivity in general, battery life on the devices or battery running out during a shift, And then application stability, right? And that really resonated with me. If you get a chance, there's a really good video Apple put out. I believe it was for their 2016 WWDC conference, and it's called The World Without Apps. And it just shows what somebody would do if their phone all of a sudden lost all of their applications. And I was like, it's a great one. I play it at, a ton of my trainings, a ton of conferences. And it's funny to see that, because when you really look at something like that, you realize that the reason why we have these mobile devices is because of the applications that reside on them. And then they're able to consume that, right? So for us, it's making sure that not only can we support the devices when they're out in the field, but these days the trend is to be proactive. How do we understand when these batteries need to be replaced? How do we understand if the devices have the right version of the applications on them, or update them to the right version, or even be able to proactively identify any devices that are not on the correct version or for whatever reason haven't been updated? So not only are you getting into reactive management that we've been doing for many, many years with remote control, with so many of the functionalities that we have within the product, but now we're taking it to the next level with operational intelligence, which is helping you become a lot more proactive and identify these issues and resolve them before it ever causes any downtime, right? And I think that's one of the biggest value propositions that we see today, is being proactive, being able to manage those devices and still looking at the reactive piece, but being first call resolution rates. You can react, but you want to resolve that item right there and then, right? You don't want to send it to 2-3 different channels to make sure that it's resolved. It's that employee's back at work, they're being productive.
Yeah, I mean, well, right, technology is still about people, right? And we as people all have had those experiences where our computer doesn't work.
Yeah, what do you do?
It's the worst. So yeah, I really can appreciate that. And I think this is probably a right time. There was a lot to unpack there, but I think this is one of the right times to say, like, I think from the barcoding perspective, we just really appreciate that SOTI does share data via your platforms with open APIs to companies like ours. So we can take advantage of that data and allow customers to have that one source of truth. And we can pull in, kind of other OEM data, and et cetera, and really give the customers that single place to go for everything related to those IT assets. And I think with SOTI, companies like ours, we get to leverage that real-time data to be able to serve up those KPIs and those data points that help people actually make those proactive decisions. And I think that's what we are as a partnership driving towards with our IntelliTrack SOTI integration. That's what we want to get to, right? We want to keep enhancing that collaboration so that we can keep getting people the data they need to do better for their teams, their people, their customers, right, et cetera. Because I think that's ultimately what it's all about, right? I mean, if all we cared about were like apps because they're apps, like this doesn't have any value. The value is in what they do. Like, do they make the job easier? Like, how do they enhance my life as a worker? Kind of in the corporate sense. But
and I mean,
I know that labor shortage is like the critical component, right? I mean, how do we make lives better?
And I mean, when you talk about IntelliTrack, right, and the collaboration we've done over the years and the API sharing, I mean, that's a big part of our strategy, right? Everything that we do, and even the development methodology behind every new version of our products that we release is, does this have an API behind it? Can we share this information? Should this information be shared? So these kind of design decisions have really been ingrained a lot what we do to work with solutions like IntelliTrack, and being able to continuously provide more and more information as more information is made available into the systems. And I'm sure you come across it, but the discussion around workflow automation or business process automation, right? You look at all organizations, really putting that at the forefront of their business. How do you drive efficiency? Well, we should have these workflows automated, right? Whether it's for building apps to do that, or whether it's through integrations with third-party systems or integrations with the likes of IntelliTrack to really drive that ecosystem, right? Because we understand we're not the only piece of the puzzle, right? So we need to make sure that there's a big collaborative effort on it.
And I think that's also a hallmark of today's world, right? I mean, you have to have a strong ecosystem of partners. And I think that's one of the reasons why customers love working with barcoding, because we have that strong collaboration with SOTI. and you know, where we complement each other, right? So SOTI One platform bringing, you know, all of this data to the forefront and continuing to innovate and invest in making that platform better. But IntelliTrack and kind of barcoding's knowledge coming to the table. How can we help support those shared mobile devices with a check-in, check-out strategy? How can we support you know, the user management piece of it and complement what SOTI's bringing to the table? How can we use SOTI data to help our customers make better decisions? Like on and on, but we're better together, right? I mean,
it's funny because, you know, we just talked about EMM, like enterprise mobility management, but you touched on such a key point there, because it is the collaboration of that information, right? It's not just about the device anymore. It is about the employee. It's about the work function. It's about, you know, employee number, like what is actually going into these systems to help identify what these devices are being used for. And that the collaboration is absolutely amazing. And I mean, you've said it best, like where would we be without our partner network, right? Like we work hand in hand with all of our partners. We worked with you for so many years, and it's been amazing to see that continue to grow. And I think we also, one of my favorite parts of collaborating with partners, and I'm going to put my product strategy hat on for a minute, but you know, it's getting that feedback. Like, what are you hearing out in the field? Like, what do we need to build into the next version of our product? Or what do we need to be considering when we look at the, you know, 12-month or, you know, 1 to 3 year roadmap of the products? Because mobility is always changing. I was just talking to a class of university students the other week, and you know, you tell them about something that is a couple of years old and they're like, oh, wow, you might as well be in the dark ages. But, you know, it's just funny because when you look at mobility, every day a new device is released. You know, every year we get new massive firmware updates, big OS updates, and we have to stay on top of that because our customers have come to expect that. They're not building a strategy for what they have today, and they're building a strategy for what's their business going to look like in 3 years from now, 5 years from now. And working, you know, with ourselves and barcoding is they get that strategic overview, right? They're not just solving challenges today. They're preparing to be more efficient and solve the challenges of the future with devices they might not even know they're going to have in their organization, right?
Yeah, well, and that's it, right? The pace of change and handling the pace of change is the core reason you cannot not have a mobility management strategy. Like, it's vital to be able to keep up. But one thing I did think about when you were talking about this is that, you know, if we maybe aren't keeping up as well with all these new devices and these new patches and these new whatevers, you know, I think security has got to be top of mind for every CIO, CTO out there. So, you know, talk to me about SOTI's viewpoint on security. I mean, I think, you know, if you're not, you know, tracking these things to the nth degree, I think you're opening yourself up for massive risks.
Yeah, I mean, you can take security in so many different ways, and the amount of conversations that we have week over week about security, and you know, every other day I feel like the ransomware here, like, you know, you have one rogue device caused an organization to lose millions of records, and we hear about those things every day, and we take a very serious approach when it comes to security, not only in our products, but SOTI as an organization as well, right? We put a lot of emphasis into making sure that we ourselves have a lot of security protocols in place, because so many customers rely on the solutions and information that we have internally as well. But when we really look at security from a mobile perspective, for us, it's really becomes the conglomeration of policies that are always enabled on the device. And what I mean by that, it's the posture of the device, right? So there's two ways to really look at it. One is preventative. Can we prevent for any devices becoming compromised? And the second is also reactionary. And I'll give you a little bit of an example on this, right? So when you look at HIPAA compliance, right? So when we look at healthcare, you know, visiting nurse associations, everyone's being provided tablets because it's going to make their job that much better, that much more efficient. But when they have those devices, it's making sure that we disable certain things in settings. We're disabling USB ports. We're disabling physical functionalities of the device that could potentially be exploited or compromised. And we're putting that device in a posture where you only have access to exactly what you need to do your work, right? So you have only 3 or 4 key apps. You don't have direct access to settings. We control the communication channel. And if the posture of that device ever changes, then we can get alerted about it, right? And understand what happens. And that's kind of the proactive way that we've looked at it. to make sure that we keep the devices in a certain level of security. But then you also look at it from a perspective of reactionary. Well, what if somebody loses that device, right? Like, what if you forget that device in, in a Tim Hortons or McDonald's or whatever it may be, right? Like, you just left it behind. Well, we need to have those policies in place to be able to remotely wipe the device. And I always joke around, what's a $300-400 tablet? Once the data's off of it, like, nobody cares. You don't want to be the next company in the news that says millions of patient records lost because, somebody left a device unlocked somewhere, right? So, and when we really talk about security, it's also keeping apps and devices up to date, right? When you look at the release notes of any OS version update or even firmware updates, the biggest bulk of those release notes is all security patches and updates within there, right? Something that a lot of time we don't even look at as, users of the devices as an example, but there's a massive amount of change that goes into that. And to your point, it's how do you make sure that every device has the latest and greatest updates to make sure we can negate any kind of an attack vector? That's when the solution comes into play, automated enforced updates. And even down to the app level, maybe the OS is secure, but what about this one application that you found a vulnerability? And how do you make sure that 10,000, 100,000, or 1 million devices are updated right away with the right information and the right applications to negate the attack vector?
Right, and updated in a way that doesn't break anything.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And if it does, how do you roll back to make sure you caught the issue? Hey, it's software after all, right? So there's always a factor you got to watch out for, right? So
yeah. Oh yeah. So I mean, I think we've covered so much ground today, but I think something that people overlook often in this conversation, talk about devices, and everybody thinks like this.
Yeah.
Or in our world, it's a rugged device, but what about the printers?
Yeah.
Right? Like, I know that a printer is no longer, like, I made fun, like, RF guns are no longer RF guns, they're these computers, but a printer is no longer just a printer, right? They're smart as well.
Yeah, I mean, it really has been an interesting journey for us with printers as well. Like, I mean, as our platform evolved, as we talk to our partners and we talk to our customers, we really understood that there's a whole play for mobile printers, right? Like, and we've managed all different types of printers and we've collaborated on many different setups. But the case I probably want to look at is mobile printers. When you have that worker and they have their Android device, they have their rugged device, but they also have a printer on their belt, and that becomes pretty much their technology stack that they have to use every day to perform their job. And we found that a lot of these organizations didn't have a cohesive way to manage printers from multiple vendors, right? And we always talk about hardware vendors getting into the software industry, and sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. But one of the biggest things that we found is, and specifically when we've interviewed a lot of CIOs, they said, what are they most worried about? Well, it's the increase in these endpoints that are coming in within their organization that are becoming attack vectors. And you look at some of these organizations, whether it's a mobile printer or a desktop printer, they're all on the network. They all have access to corporate networks, and they're growing at an incredible pace. And mobile printing, like mobile printing in itself, is growing. I believe, I think the last stats I saw was over at 10% globally in a $40 billion market. I'd have to check that. But I mean, those are kind of the things that I saw. But when you look into that, how are we able to bring the same life cycle management and the same policy management to that? Well, that's through our printing solution, right? It's kind of our EMM offering for printers. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that's coming together. But again, it goes back to the life cycle from the time that printer gets into your warehouse or gets into your retail operation. How do you get it on the corporate network? How do you put the right Wi-Fi and security certificates on it? How do you rotate those certificates to make sure that every 90 days or every 6 months, whatever it may be, it's getting the latest and greatest to make sure they have the right posture and the right security set up on them? But it's been a very interesting field, because I'll go back to the point of what we talked about earlier with Android. How do you manage a fragmented space of multiple Android devices in a single console? Well, that exact same challenges exist for printers. If I buy printers from 3-4 different vendors, do I have to use 3-4 different solutions? Do I have to train people on 3-4 different solutions now, essentially, to make sure that the printers are in the right posture? And that's where SOTI Connect really comes into play, as we standardize that the same way we've standardized it for Android management across various OEMs. With a single click, you drive the same policies across many different printer vendors. And it becomes something organizations, when they see it, they're like, oh, this is exactly what we went through 7-8 years ago when we started adopting, Android devices in the organization.
Yeah, so they're familiar with it. I loved when you said, because you mentioned the printer as part of this employee's tech stack, right?
Yeah.
And I love that visual because, again, like I definitely go back to technology and all the evolution, everything, all the work that we do is really still about people, right? And so if I'm struggling and I need to make my employees' jobs better, I need to retain my employees, like managing that tech stack for them per employee or per shared pool, and making sure that it's going to work every time I show up to work, like that right there, that's really what it's all about, right?
Oh. Yeah, I mean, you've touched on such a big point that we're hearing about lately, like labor shortages. You're talking about people kind of rethinking their careers, right? And they want to say, like, what do I really want to do, right? Like, I don't, the whole era of even remote work in certain industries, right? But when you talk about supply chain specifically, like a lot of these jobs, are in the warehouse, right? They're driving the transportation and logistics. For them, it becomes about employee satisfaction. If your printer's currently always on the fritz and you can't do your job, or you get to the front to deliver a package in front of a customer and your device dies, they can't sign for the package, or the app's not updated, so it won't let you sign for the package. Little things like that are often overlooked when it comes to like EMM, UEM solutions. When we look at it in general, is how do we keep the employees happy? And by keeping their devices up and running as close to 100% of times one, you're also inadvertently retaining employees, and you can actually highlight that they're happy and they're satisfied doing their job. So when you bring somebody on board, they don't leave 6 months later because they can't do their job, because they keep scratching their head about why their whole tech stack that they're wearing doesn't work, right?
You're just making me think about Office Space. Did you ever see that movie?
The printer?
They just take the baseball bat to the printer because they just can't take it anymore. So yeah, we don't want that.
Trust me, we have a lot of our customers that express those frustrations. I mean, you always see it's funny because the other week, one of our colleagues was flying back from one of our trainings, and he actually took a little video, and he was at the airport, and they were trying to print his bag tags, and the printer wasn't working. So he's there. The people behind him are stuck in line. The person's opening up the drawer. He's trying to see what's going on with the printer, but we all know that person printing the bag tags is not a specialist in printers, right? Or at least you wouldn't imagine that they are, right? So you need solutions to be able to quickly identify that, right? And I go back to saying being proactive. If somebody in the service says, hey, the printer head's about to go, right? Or it's about to burn out, go in there, you replace it, and you've never would have incurred that issue with it not being able to print the boarding tag, right? Or the baggage tags, whatever it may be. And I mean, there's hundreds of use cases like that. But that's one our own employee was on there, and he's actually taking a video to send back to us to say, look what they have to manually do to fix this, right? Like they needed our solution. Yeah.
Well, speaking of needing your solution, I know our time is kind of coming to a close. This has been fabulous, by the way. I want to, I do want to give you a little bit of the floor to say, for those who maybe aren't using SOTI, which hopefully in our community base, like that's very few and far between, but for those who aren't, or maybe aren't using the full platform, maybe they're only familiar with SOTI Mobi Control. Like, what would you what's that little pitch that you want to people to kind of remember, kind of coming out of this huddle about the SOTI One platform?
I mean, when we really talk about the SOTI One platform, what it really all boils down to is driving organizational efficiency while reducing downtime. Every single time a printer or a mobile device is down, you're losing revenue, right? And I think that really is what it all boils down to when we talk to a lot of our partners and our customers. And when we look at mobility as a whole, I go back to what I've said. The SOTI One platform really does help you take your mobility to endless possibilities. And it's being your partner there for the next 1 to 3 to 5 years, because what we're using today is not going to be the technology that we're going to be using 3 to 5 years from now. And when customers come and look at the SOTI One platform, they know they're getting a trusted solution for many years to come, not just solving the challenges that they have today. And, whether it's printers, devices, whether it be wearables, peripherals, whatever it may be, you need a solution like ours. You need the SOTI One platform to keep your organization streamlined, keep your employees focused on the job at hand, and doing more with less, right? That really is what it comes down to, is you can't stay the same. And mobility and going through that digital transformation, you need the SOTI One platform to go through that journey in an efficient manner.
Yep. And this is why we are partners. We certainly, absolutely buy into that and believe that to our customer base and any prospective customers out there, if you've heard all this and you thought, gosh, it's a lot to do, you don't have to do it alone. That's the beauty of it, right? That's the beauty.
Trusted consultants. That's it. That's why we love the partnership.
That's what we're here for. So I really appreciate you taking some time with me today. I mean, your passion for your job is definitely infectious, and really appreciate you sharing that with us on the Barcoding Huddle. So thank you so much for that. Just to close us out, because you did mention that a lot of people are rethinking their careers at this time. Not that you are, not that I am, but I thought a fun personal share for our final question would be, what did you want to be when you were a grown-up, when you were a kid? Because I'm assuming it wasn't your current title.
Oh, it's so I'll tell you a little bit. So when I was young, I wanted to be an architect.
Interesting.
Yeah, I got AutoCAD certified.
You kind of are, though, right? I mean, you kind of are an architect.
Exactly, more of a software architect, maybe. But
yeah,
I loved architecture. I mean, I still love architecture, but it's an interesting question, because I love the idea that I love the design aspect. As I mentioned, I got AutoCAD certified. I got the certification, and going through that process, I realized I love the concept of what an architect is, but I didn't like what they had to do day to day in the detail-driven approach of having to map out every single corner. And it was very interesting, because through that, I actually learned to try different things, to learn what you don't like, because that will always bring you one step closer to what you like. But yeah, wanted to be an architect for many years and drove towards that. But my passion always has been in computers, right? From the time I was a young child, from my grandparents to my mom, they're all in a computer space. So I always had a love for computer technology. But yeah, architect was the first choice, not an astronaut, but an architect.
That was mine. I always wanted to be an astronaut till I learned that I needed to be good at math. And then I thought, well, I loved archaeology, actually. So funny enough, your story about architects, similar to my story about archaeology, is that I absolutely love the concept of it and the exploration of it, and like learning and uncovering all these different stories of people. And then I learned you had to like catalog. And it was like very, very detail oriented cataloging work. And I was like, oh, nope, never mind.
Yeah. You always find those aspects of different jobs that you're like, I love the concept, but I'm not as much about the little administrative tasks, and it takes away from the overall.
Yeah, picture. They never showed Indiana Jones cataloging, so I was like, come on. So, well, anyway, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you to our partner, SOTI. Our collaboration gets stronger every day. I know in January, we, 2023, our teams met. We started to build even more collaboration between your SOTI One platform and our IntelliTrack platform. And I think, we're just going to keep pushing the envelope to innovate for our customers. So excited to see what the future holds for us, Mikhail.
Many things to come. I know there's a lot of collaboration we have going on. So I'm very excited for the next steps and where mobility is going to take us.
Well, thanks again. And if you liked this video so much that you want to see more of it, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And you can always ask us questions if you want to reach Mikhail, myself, or you have, a particular situation you want to talk to us about mobility operations. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to talk about your specific scenarios. So reach out to us at barcoding.com. Drop me an email and I'll get right back to you, and we will get a consultation set up. So once again, thank you.
Thanks so much, Jody.
Thanks for joining the huddle.
Take care. Thank you.